Tonight we are going to slow down together and set something down for a few hours. If your heart feels heavy tonight, you are in the right place. Not the sharp kind of heavy, not the kind that has a name and a solution, the other kind. The kind that accumulates quietly over weeks, made of people you are worried about and things you cannot fix, and a tiredness that sleep alone has not been touching. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is right now and where you are listening from. It is quietly comforting to notice who else is awake, carrying their own heavy hearts into this same darkness. You are not the only one. You do not need to know anything about Scripture tonight. You do not need any particular belief. You do not need to put anything into words. You only need to be here. Let your body settle. Let the weight rest somewhere other than your chest for a while, held by a grace that does not tire. There is nothing to figure out tonight. There is nowhere else to be, nothing to solve before you are allowed to rest. Whatever you are carrying will still be there in the morning if you want it back. Tonight, it can be set down, and there is peace in that. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Chapel. Let us begin. There is a story sometimes told about a man walking a long road with a heavy sack on his shoulder, and the farmer who stopped to give him a ride. Nobody remembers the man's name. It is one of those small stories that gets told in villages and in kitchens, and by people who have noticed something about how human beings behave and cannot quite say it directly. The road ran between two towns, and it was a long walk most of a day. There was no shade for the middle stretch of it, just packed dirt, low scrub on either side, and the sound of insects in the heat. The man had been walking since morning. On his shoulder he carried a sack, and in the sack was everything he owned, or everything he was bringing, or everything he had been asked to deliver. The story is not specific about what was in it. That may be deliberate. It only says the sack was heavy, and that he had been carrying it for hours. Consider that the story does not tell you what was inside. It does not need to. Everyone listening already knows what is in their own. By early afternoon, he was struggling. His shoulder had gone numb in the way a shoulder does after enough hours, first sore, then hot, then simply absent. He had switched sides several times. He was walking slower than he had that morning, and he had begun to calculate, over and over, how much of the road was left, which is what people do when the answer will not help them. Then he heard a cart behind him. It was a farmer, going his way, with an empty flatbed and one tired horse. The farmer slowed and looked at him, and said what people said on those roads, "Get in." The man was enormously grateful. He climbed up onto the back of the cart and sat down with his legs hanging over the edge, and the cart started moving again, and for the first time since morning he was not walking. The relief of it went through his whole body. The road began to pass underneath him without any effort of his own. They went on like that for a while. The road was rough. The wheels made their noise over the packed dirt. The horse did its slow work. The afternoon began to lean toward evening, and after some time the farmer glanced back over his shoulder to say something about the weather, and stopped. Because the man was sitting on the back of his cart with the sack still up on his shoulder. He had not put it down. He was holding it exactly as he had held it on the road, with one hand steadying it and his back braced under the weight, riding along in a cart with an entirely empty flatbed all around him. The farmer looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Why are you still holding that?" And the man said, "I did not want to make the horse work any harder." That is the whole story. The farmer laughed, or did not laugh, depending on who is telling it. And eventually the man understood and put the sack down on the boards beside him, and the horse pulled exactly the same weight it had been pulling the entire time. Consider how the farmer would have told that story later. At a table to other farmers after the harvest. There was a man on the road last month, and I picked him up, and he sat on my cart for an hour, holding his own sack. They would have laughed, not cruelly, the way people laugh at something they recognize in themselves and are relieved to see from outside. Because every one of those farmers had done a version of it. Every one of them had lain awake over something that was already handled, or held on to a worry long past the point where holding it accomplished anything. The story survives because it is not about a foolish man. It is about a completely ordinary one. Consider how ridiculous that sounds when it is someone else doing it. And then consider how much of your own life has been exactly that. You are already in the cart. You have been in the cart for years. The ground is moving underneath you without your effort. Your food arrives. Your heart beats without instruction, about 100,000 times a day, and you have never once had to remember. The sun comes up on schedule. Whole systems you did not build and could not maintain are carrying you at this moment, and have been carrying you since before you could speak. Consider a single ordinary day from that angle. You woke up in a building someone else engineered. You drank water that arrived through pipes laid by people who are dead now. You ate food grown by strangers in fields you will never see, delivered by drivers whose names you do not know. You were healthy because of medicines developed over centuries by researchers who never imagined you. You walked on roads maintained by a system you have never inspected. None of that was your doing. All of it held you up today. And you are sitting in the middle of all of it with the sack still on your shoulder. Notice the reason the man gave. He was not stubborn. He was not proud. He said something almost tender. I did not want to make the horse work any harder. He was trying to be considerate. He was trying not to be a burden. He was carrying the weight out of a kind of misplaced courtesy. That is very close to how most people carry things. You may not think of yourself as someone who refuses help. You may hand things off at work without difficulty. You may accept a ride, or a meal, or a favor from a neighbor. But look at what you are doing at this hour. You are lying in the dark, holding a sack, turning over the situation with your sister, rehearsing the conversation about the money, keeping watch over someone else's difficulty from a bed at 2 a.m, from a distance where there is nothing you could do about it, even if you were entirely awake and fully rested. And underneath that, quietly, is the same courtesy the man on the cart had. A sense that it would be too much to hand over, that the weight is yours specifically, assigned to you, not transferable, that putting it down would be, somehow, an imposition on something. Consider also who the man was being considerate toward. A horse. An animal that pulls carts professionally. An animal whose entire function, whose entire strength, whose whole design is to move weight along a road. That is the part that makes the story funny and then makes it land. He was protecting something that was built for exactly this. Consider what the farmer actually knew that the man did not. He knew the weight was already in the cart. It had been from the moment the man climbed up. The sack was not lighter for being held on a shoulder. It was simply being held twice. That is the arithmetic of a heavy heart at night. The thing you are carrying is already being carried. You are just carrying it a second time, on top of the first, with your own strength, in the dark, while lying down and unable to do anything about it. There is a grace in noticing that, not a grace that requires you to do anything, or believe anything, or make a decision at 2 in the morning. Only the small relief of realizing that the horse has been pulling the whole weight this entire time, and that your shoulder was never load-bearing. Notice that the story does not end with the man being scolded. The farmer did not turn around and lecture him about faith, or trust, or the proper way to accept help. He did not tell him he was doing it wrong. He asked a simple question: why are you still holding that? That is all this story is asking tonight. Not a change in your beliefs, not a decision. Just a question asked gently from the front of a cart in the middle of a long road. Why are you still holding that? You do not have to answer it. You do not have to defend your reasons. Most people's reasons are good ones. They are usually made of love or duty or an old habit of being the reliable one in a family that needed somebody to be reliable. Those are not bad reasons. Nobody is going to argue with them tonight. Consider that the man on the cart also had good reasons. Consideration for the animal. Not wanting to take advantage of a stranger's kindness. Not wanting to seem like he expected too much from a free ride. Every one of those instincts is decent, and every one of them kept a sack on his shoulder for an hour longer than necessary. The only thing being pointed out is that the boards of the cart are right there beside you, and they are empty, and they have been empty the whole time. Consider what you have been carrying tonight, specifically, not the general weight, the individual items. Someone you are worried about, whose situation you cannot fix from here. A conversation you handled badly, or well, or are still deciding about. Money, in whatever form money takes in your life. A body that is not doing what it used to do, yours or somebody else's. Each of those is a real thing. None of them is imaginary. And not one of them is going to move between now and morning as a result of anything happening inside your chest. Feel the cart under you now in your imagination. Feel the rough boards. Feel the slow rhythm of the wheels over the packed dirt. Feel the horse ahead of you doing its steady work. It is unhurried. It is unbothered. It does not know what is on your shoulder and would not care. Feel the sack. Feel the shape of it. Feel the weight. Feel the place where the strap has been pressing all day. Now feel what it would be like to let it slide down onto the boards. Not to throw it. Not to abandon it. Simply to let it rest beside you, where it already is, where it has already been, in the cart that is already carrying both of you. Feel your shoulder come up. Feel the muscle along your neck let go. Feel the strange lightness that arrives when a body stops doing something it has been doing for so long that it forgot it was doing it. Notice how little effort that took. Notice that nothing had to be decided or believed or resolved. The sack simply moved from a shoulder to a board, and the total weight in the cart did not change by a single ounce. That is grace in the plainest form it comes in, not a rescue, a redistribution you were always allowed to make. You are held tonight by something that has been carrying the weight all along. It is not working any harder because of what is on your shoulder. It has never once been working harder. It never will. Consider one more time how the man got into that position. He did not decide at the start of the day that he would carry the sack even after being offered a ride. Nobody makes that decision consciously. He simply had been carrying it for 6 hours, and the carrying had become what his body was doing. And when the situation changed, his body did not get the message. That is nearly always how it happens. Not a decision, a momentum. Which means the correction is not a decision either. It is only a noticing. Somebody says, "Why are you still holding that?" And the body remembers that it has options. Set the sack down on the boards. Rest against the side rail. The road is long. The cart is moving. And there is peace in riding without holding. Consider what the man on the cart did for the rest of that journey. The story does not say much, but you can imagine it well enough. He sat with his back against the side rail and his sack beside him on the boards, and he watched the country go by for the first time all day. He had walked that road before. He had never seen it. When you are carrying something heavy, the road is only ground. You watch your feet, you count the distance. You do not notice the shape of the hills, or the color of the light, or the small farms set back from the road, with smoke coming out of them. Now he saw all of it, not because anything had changed about the country, because his shoulder was free and his eyes could go somewhere else. That may be the quietest benefit of setting a thing down. Not relief exactly, attention, the sudden availability of everything you have been too loaded to notice. Let us rest inside another story. There is a sentence in the Gospels that most people have heard so many times it has stopped sounding like what it actually is. It sounds like a comfort. It is also, if you slow down, a piece of craftsmanship. The teacher said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Consider who was saying this. Before he was known for anything else, he had spent years working in a small shop with his hands. He would have started as a boy, sweeping shavings off the floor, handing his father tools, learning which piece of wood was sound and which had a hidden crack that would split under strain. By the time he was a grown man, his hands would have known wood the way a fisherman's hands know rope. The old word used for his trade is often translated carpenter, but it covered more than furniture. It included building work, doors, beams, roof supports, and yokes. A yoke was one of the most important things a village carpenter made. It was the wooden crosspiece laid across the necks of two animals, usually oxen. It let them pull a plow or a cart together. It shared the weight between them. And a good yoke was not generic. This is the part that gets lost. A cheap yoke, made to a standard size, would rub. It would raise sores within days. It would make the labor miserable. It would make the animal slow and resentful. A skilled carpenter measured the specific animal it was for, the width of its shoulders, the curve of its neck. He shaped the wood, sometimes over weeks. He sanded it. He tested the fit. He corrected it, until the yoke sat on that particular animal the way a good pair of shoes sits on a particular foot. There is a story told, though it cannot be verified, that customers used to bring their animals to the shop in Nazareth, specifically because the yokes made there did not chafe. Not one, not ever. Whoever built them understood the shoulders of the specific ox that would wear it. He would not let it leave the shop until it fit. That was the reputation, not speed, not price, fit. Consider that detail sitting inside a sentence you have heard your whole life without noticing it. My yoke is easy, not my yoke is light in general. Easy in the specific technical sense a carpenter would use it. Fitted, sanded down, smoothed at exactly the places where a rougher version would rub, made for the shoulders it is going to sit on. That changes what the sentence is actually offering. It is not offering the removal of weight. A yoke is not for creatures carrying nothing. It is offering a particular kind of weight, cut to fit you, shaped at the places where a rougher version would have worn you raw. You may have been carrying a badly made yoke for a long time, not because life is unfair in some abstract sense, but because the version of your burden you have been carrying was shaped by someone else's hands, or by no hands at all, or by your own hands working too fast and without the patience a good carpenter takes. Consider what happens to an animal working in a badly fitted yoke over a season. It does not simply become uncomfortable. It changes how it moves. It shifts its weight to protect the sore places. It pulls at an angle. It compensates. And then gradually, the compensation becomes the animal's normal gait. And other things start hurting. And by the end of a year, the whole body has been reorganized around avoiding one point of pressure. People do exactly this, not physically, structurally. A person carrying something badly for long enough will reorganize their entire life around the sore place and will eventually forget that the reorganization was ever a response to anything. You may be shaped right now by an accommodation you made years ago and stopped noticing. Consider the second part of the image, the part almost everyone misses because they picture the wrong shape. A yoke is not built for one animal. It is built for two. That is the entire design. 2 necks, 2 shoulders, one crosspiece resting across both, so that neither animal pulls the full weight alone. You have likely been picturing yourself under a yoke by yourself. Nearly everyone does, the first several times they hear this sentence. It is an easy mistake because the word yoke has drifted in everyday speech to mean any burden, singular, carried by one. But a single animal yoke does not exist in the actual image. The word itself assumes company. There has never been a solitary version of it in the world this sentence came from. Which means when he says, "Take my yoke," he is describing the other side of it. He is not handing you something to strap on alone and drag behind you. He is stepping into the other half of the frame himself. Consider the mechanics of this a little further, because it matters for what it does to the weight. In a 2-animal yoke, the crossbar does not simply sit there decoratively. It transfers force. When one animal stumbles or tires or slows on a hill, the crossbar carries some of that strain to the other side, and the stronger animal, without being asked, takes up the difference. That is not sentiment. That is physics, built into a piece of wood 3,000 years ago by people who understood exactly what they were doing. Consider what that changes about the weight of the thing you are carrying tonight. It is not sitting entirely across your own neck. There has been another set of shoulders under the crossbar this whole time, matched to yours, taking a portion you never had to ask for, because the yoke was built that way from the very beginning, on purpose, by someone who does this work. When you stumble at 2 in the morning, when the grief comes back around, when the worry about your child or your parent or your own body presses down harder than it did an hour ago, the crossbar does what a crossbar does. It moves some of that weight to the other side. You do not have to request the transfer. It is built into the wood. Notice that he does not say the yoke disappears. Oxen still work. The cart still has to be pulled. There is still a field, still a load, still a long day of labor ahead. The promise is not an empty yoke. The promise is a shared one, fitted well, worn at the correct places, carried by 2. There is a grace in that kind of honesty. It does not tell you that difficulty ends. It tells you that you were never meant to take the difficulty alone. It tells you the fit has already been measured. It tells you the other set of shoulders has been in place the entire time you thought you were pulling by yourself. That is a strange kind of peace, arriving not through the removal of weight, but through the truth about how it was always meant to be carried. Consider how a well-fitted yoke actually feels to the animal wearing it, once it has been properly made. Not weightless, never weightless, but settled, resting along the strongest part of the frame, distributed correctly, causing no wound. An animal in a good yoke can work an entire day and come home undamaged. An animal in a bad one is bleeding by noon. You may have been in a bad one, self-made or handed to you by circumstances, or shaped by people who did not measure you carefully, if they measured you at all. That is not a mark against you. It is simply a description of why the weight has felt unbearable in a way that weight is not supposed to feel. Consider how many of the yokes people carry were never actually built by a craftsman at all. Some are assembled out of expectation. What a parent wanted, what a culture demanded, what a version of yourself from 10 years ago decided you would become without consulting the person you have actually turned out to be. Those yokes are rarely measured to fit anyone. They are cut to a general shape and handed out wholesale, and people wonder for years why the same ordinary labor that seems to sit lightly on someone else leaves them raw by evening. That is not a flaw in your strength. It is a flaw in the wood. The offer tonight is not lighter oxen. It is a better yoke, one built by someone who took the time to know the exact width of what you are carrying and shaped the wood around it and will not let it rub. Consider how the carpenter would have known the measurements were right, not by looking, by watching the animal work in it and then checking the neck afterward for wear. The proof of a good yoke is what is not there. No sores, no rubbed patches, nothing raw. You may be able to tell something about the yokes you have been wearing by the same method, not by how they look, by what has been worn raw. Feel the crossbar now in your imagination. Feel it settle low across your shoulders, along the strongest part of you, not the softest. Feel that it has been sanded at exactly the places where a rougher version would have already worn you down. And feel, beside you, the other half of it, the place where a second set of shoulders takes up the other end of the same beam, not behind you, watching to see if you keep pace, not ahead of you, pulling you forward faster than you can go, beside you, matched to your pace, pulling the same load, at the same speed, on the same road. Consider what it means that the fit was measured before you asked for it. You did not have to explain your particular exhaustion. You did not have to describe, in words you could barely find, the exact shape of what has been pressing on you these last weeks. The carpenter already knew. He built the yoke before you walked into the shop. That is a different kind of grace than most comfort offers. Most comfort asks you to explain yourself first. This asks nothing. It was already finished, sanded, and waiting, in your exact size, before you knew you needed it. You are held tonight by a craftsman who measured you before you asked to be measured. The yoke fits because it was built to fit. The burden is light not because it weighs nothing. It is light because it was never meant to be carried by one. Notice the other set of shoulders beside you now. Notice that they have been there the whole time, matched to your pace, not behind, not ahead, beside. Consider what the second animal in a yoke actually does on a hill. When two oxen pull together and the ground rises, they do not both strain equally. The stronger one leans in. It is not a decision the animal makes. It is a consequence of being physically connected. The load redistributes itself through the wood toward whichever side has more left to give. That is the mechanism, not sentiment, physics built into a shared beam, which means the transfer happens on the hills specifically. When the ground is flat, the yoke is barely noticeable. It is only when things get steep that you find out what the other side has been holding. Rest your neck into the wood. It was shaped for exactly this shape. Rest in the fit of it, the way an animal finally rests once the sores have healed and the crossbar sits where it should. There is a peace in a burden shared that a burden carried alone can never quite reach. There is a deeper peace still in finally being measured, seen, and fitted for. There is grace in a yoke that does not chafe. Consider one more detail about how those yokes were fitted. A carpenter would not make a yoke for an ox he had never seen. The animal had to be brought to the shop. It had to stand there, in the dust outside, while the man measured across its shoulders with a length of cord. The animal did nothing during this. It did not cooperate in any meaningful way. It stood there, occasionally shifting its weight, entirely unaware that something was being built to fit it. That is worth holding on to tonight. The measuring does not require your participation. You do not have to explain yourself or present your difficulty in an organized way, or help with the shaping of the wood. You only have to stand there, tired, while somebody who does this work takes the measurement. Consider what Moses gained practically from Jethro's redesign, not less responsibility. He was still the one the hardest cases came to. What he gained was evenings. There is a whole category of thing that only exists in evenings. Conversations that are not about logistics. Meals eaten slowly. The particular quality of attention a person can give their family when they are not depleted. A structure that takes all of a person's daylight takes those things too, silently, without ever appearing on any list of what the work costs. You may have been paying that cost for years without itemizing it. There is another story that points to the same sharing. There is a strange short scene in the older scriptures about a man whose arms got tired and what the people around him did about it. His name was Moses. By this point in the story, he had already done a great deal. He had led a large group of people out of a hard situation, across difficult country, through more than one crisis that would have finished most leaders. He was, by any measure, the strong one, the one others looked to, the one who did not get to have a bad day, because everyone else's steadiness depended on his. On this particular day, there was a battle happening in a valley below a hill. An enemy people called the Amalekites had attacked, and Moses had sent a man named Joshua down into the valley to lead the fighting, while Moses himself climbed the hill above it with 2 companions to watch and to pray. He was not fighting in the valley himself. He was standing on top of the hill, and the story says that as long as he held his hands up in the air, the people below were winning. And when his arms grew tired and dropped, the other side began to win instead. Nobody fully understands why the story works this way. Some read it as a symbol of prayer sustained without ceasing. Some simply take it at face value. A strange and specific mechanism in an ancient account. Either way, the arithmetic of the scene is unmistakable. Arms up, winning. Arms down, losing. Nothing else in the valley changed. Only the position of 2 tired arms on a hill above it. Consider how impossible that must have felt to him. An entire battle, an entire outcome, apparently resting on the literal endurance of his own 2 arms. Not his wisdom, not his strategy. Just his arms held up for as long as they could manage. And arms get tired. That is simply what arms do. It does not matter how important the outcome is. It does not matter how much depends on you. It does not matter how many people are counting on your strength. Muscle fatigues. It is not a failure of character. It is biology. By the middle of the day, Moses could not hold his arms up any longer on his own. He tried. He had been trying since morning. His shoulders burned. His arms shook. Slowly, no matter how hard he willed it otherwise, they began to sink. Here is the part of the story that matters most tonight. He did not push through it alone. He did not grit his teeth and force his arms up by sheer determination until he collapsed from the effort. Instead, two men who were with him, named Aaron and Hur, saw what was happening, and they did something very simple. They found a stone for him to sit on, and then one stood on each side of him, and each one held up one of his arms. Moses sat down. Aaron held up his right arm. Hur held up his left. The two of them kept his arms raised until the sun went down and the battle was won. Notice what did not happen. Moses did not stop being the leader. He was not replaced. He was not told he had failed. Nobody said his weakness had put everyone at risk. Nobody suggested a stronger man should take his place on the hill. He was simply given a stone to sit on, and two people who held his arms up when his own strength ran out. Consider how much courage it must have taken for a man like Moses to sit down. He was the one everyone depended on. He had spoken to burning bushes and parted seas, at least in the story people told about him. There is a particular kind of pride that comes with being the reliable one. It is very hard to set down, even when your own body is telling you, plainly, that it has nothing left to give. But he sat down. He let two other men hold his arms, and the story does not treat this as a footnote. It treats it as essential. Without Aaron and Hur, the account is clear that the outcome would have been different. Their holding was not a kindness added on top of the real work. Their holding was the real work, every bit as much as Moses standing on the hill in the first place. Consider the phrase the text uses. It says his hands were heavy, not tired. Heavy. That is a good word for it. Heaviness is different from tiredness. Tiredness resolves with sleep. Heaviness accumulates across weeks, and sleep touches it only slightly, and it has more to do with what you are carrying than with how many hours you have been awake. You may have been sleeping and still waking up heavy. That is not a sleep problem. That is arms that have been up for a very long time. You may have spent a long time being the one whose arms have to stay up, the one who holds the household together, the one whose steadiness other people are quietly depending on, whether or not they ever say so directly. The parent who cannot fall apart because someone smaller is watching. The friend everyone calls when things go wrong. The one nobody thinks to call when things go wrong for them. That position wears you down exactly the way it wore Moses down. Not because you are weak, because arms get tired, all arms. Every single one, eventually, no matter how much depends on them staying raised. There is a grace in this story that is easy to miss because it does not center on Moses at all. It centers on the stone and the two men and the ordinary, unglamorous decision to notice that someone's arms were shaking and to do something about it before he collapsed entirely. Consider how easily Aaron and Hur could have looked away. They were not the ones fighting in the valley. They had climbed the hill as companions, not as designated helpers. Nobody had assigned them the job of watching Moses' arms. They simply saw, and they moved. That is worth sitting with. A great deal of the help that actually changes something in a life is not the help anyone was formally assigned to give. It is the help offered by whoever happened to be standing nearby, paying enough attention to notice. Notice that Aaron and Hur did not ask Moses if he wanted help. They did not wait for him to admit he was struggling, or to phrase a request in exactly the right way, or to reach some threshold of visible collapse before they acted. They saw the sinking arms, and they acted. Sometimes the help that matters most is not the kind you have to request. It is the kind that simply shows up because someone was paying attention. You may be waiting tonight for permission to stop holding your own arms up. Permission you have not been given, or have not asked for, or do not believe you deserve. Consider that Moses did not ask for the stone either. It was brought to him. He only had to be willing to sit down on it when it arrived. Consider also that nothing in the story suggests Moses would have asked, left to himself. He was on that hill because it was his job to be there. Asking for a rest in the middle of it would likely never have occurred to him. The stone came because two other people decided he needed it more than he was willing to admit. You may be exactly that kind of person, the kind who would never ask, the kind whose arms would simply keep failing silently until there was nothing left before ever saying a word about it. If that is you, this story is not asking you to change. It is only asking you to notice that help sometimes arrives without being requested, because someone nearby was paying attention. Consider what it would mean to imagine, right now, a stone being brought to you. Not a solution to whatever your arms have been raised for, just a place to sit, and two steady presences, one on each side, taking the actual physical weight of the thing you have been straining to hold up by yourself. You do not have to know who they are. You do not have to be able to name the source of the help. Moses did not choose Aaron and Hur out of a long list of qualified candidates. They were simply there, on the hill, willing. There is peace in being held up rather than holding yourself up. It is a different kind of peace than the exhausted satisfaction of having pushed through on your own. It is quieter. It gives your arms an actual rest rather than proving what they can endure. It only requires that you let your arms be lifted by hands that are not your own. Consider that Moses did not thank them, as far as the record shows. There is no scene of gratitude. The text moves straight from the arms being held to the battle ending. That is probably accurate to how it actually goes. When somebody holds you up during a hard stretch, there is usually no moment where you turn and thank them properly. You are too depleted, and then the stretch ends and life continues, and the moment passes. If someone has held your arms up in the last year, they likely do not know it landed. That is worth remembering in daylight. Feel the hilltop now in your imagination. Feel the stone beneath you, cool, solid, exactly the right height to sit on. Feel your own arms, tired in the way arms get tired after holding something up for far too long without help. And feel, now, the hands, one under each arm, steady. Not straining, because two people sharing a weight rarely strain the way one person alone does. Feel your shoulders drop just slightly as the weight transfers from your own exhausted muscle into hands that were made for exactly this kind of holding. You are held tonight the way Moses was held on that hill, not instead of your strength being needed. Alongside it, when your strength runs out, which it always eventually does, because that is what strength does. There is a peace in that arrangement that pushing through alone can never offer. Not the peace of having proven yourself, the peace of having been noticed and reached for and held before your arms gave out entirely. Consider how long an afternoon that must have been for Aaron and Hur. Holding a man's arm above his head is not difficult for a minute. It becomes difficult around minute 15. By hour 3, it is genuinely hard, and there were two of them doing it until the sun went down. They were not having a spiritual experience. They were standing in the heat with their own shoulders aching, holding somebody else's dead weight, because they had said they would. Most of the love in the world looks like that, not moving, not eloquent, just somebody physically staying past the point where it stopped being easy. Rest on the stone. Let your arms be held by hands that are not tired yet, and that were placed there before you even had to ask. Consider what the end of that day must have looked like. The sun going down over the valley. The fighting finally stopped. Joshua walking back up the hill, tired but victorious, to find Moses still sitting on the stone, with Aaron on one side and Hur on the other, all three of them worn out, each in their own way. Nobody made a speech about it. Nobody turned the moment into a lesson for the crowd. The story simply moves on to the next thing, as if two men holding up a third man's arms all afternoon were the most natural thing in the world. In a sense, it was. That is what people who care about each other actually do, most of the time, without ceremony. You are allowed the same, not a dramatic rescue. Only two steady hands arriving quietly, staying as long as they are needed, and then letting the story move on without making a fuss about it. Consider what Aaron and Hur must have talked about, if they talked at all, during those hours. Probably nothing. It is hard to hold a conversation while holding a man's arm above his head for an entire afternoon. Mostly it would have been silence. Three tired men on a hill. The sound of the valley below, the slow movement of the sun, the occasional shifting of feet. That is what most real support looks like. Not encouragement, not advice, not a speech about perseverance. Just two people who will not leave, doing something physically uncomfortable for an unreasonable amount of time, without making it a story about themselves. If you have someone like that in your life, you are wealthy in a way that is easy to overlook. And if you cannot think of anyone tonight, consider that you have been that person for someone else more than once, and that the arrangement tends to come back around. There is another story that points to the same holding. There is a story in the older scriptures about a woman who went to a place of worship, not to pray in the way people usually picture prayer, but to empty herself completely, and who left with her face changed. Her name was Hannah. She lived with a difficulty that was, in her time and place, treated as a public failure rather than a private grief. She had not been able to have children. In her household, there was another wife named Peninnah, and that wife had several children and made sure Hannah knew it year after year with small cutting comments that never quite crossed into anything she could confront directly. Consider what that kind of provocation does over time. It is rarely dramatic enough on any single day to justify a confrontation. It arrives instead as small remarks, timed carefully, at meals, at festivals, at the exact moments when the wound is already tender. The text says, Peninnah provoked her severely to make her miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. Year after year, whenever they went up to the house of the Lord, Peninnah provoked her until she wept and would not eat. That is a particular kind of cruelty sustained across years, never quite crossing into anything a person could point to and say, "This is unforgivable. Here is proof." Just a steady drip, timed to the calendar, that Hannah had no way to escape as long as she remained part of the household. Every year the family traveled to a place of worship to make an offering. And every year, in the middle of what was supposed to be a celebration, Hannah found herself unable to eat, unable to join in, worn down by the same old wound, reopened in the same old way. One particular year, after the meal, while everyone else stayed at the table, Hannah got up. She went alone to the entrance of the sanctuary. She did not go to make a request in an orderly way. The text says she was deeply distressed. It says she wept bitterly. It says she prayed in her heart, with her lips moving but no sound coming out. Consider what that must have looked like from the outside. A woman standing in a doorway, silent, her mouth working, tears running down her face, saying nothing anyone could hear. An old priest named Eli was sitting nearby, watching the entrance the way people who work in such places often do. Half attentive, mostly tired, he saw her lips moving with no sound and assumed the obvious thing. He thought she was drunk. He said so to her. Not unkindly exactly, but bluntly, the way tired people speak to strangers they have misjudged. Hannah answered him. She said, "No, my lord. I am a woman deeply troubled. I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord." Consider how unusual it was for a woman in that period to go alone to a sanctuary and behave that way in public. She had every social reason not to. There would have been people around. Her behavior was, as Eli's reaction demonstrates, easy to misread. She went anyway, not because she was brave in any general sense, because she had reached the point where the pressure inside was larger than her concern about how she looked. Most people arrive at that point eventually, usually late at night, usually alone. Notice that phrase, pouring out my soul, not making a request, not presenting an argument, pouring, the way you pour water out of a container until there is nothing left inside it. That is a very specific kind of prayer, and it may be the kind most needed by a heavy heart at night. It is not petition. It is not negotiation. It is not even, strictly speaking, asking for anything in particular, though the text says she did ask for something specific as well. Later, once the pouring had made room for words, it is primarily emptying, getting the weight out of the body and into the air, or into silence, or into whatever is listening, so that it is no longer only inside the chest where it has been sitting for years. Consider the physical description again. Lips moving, no sound. That is not a woman composing sentences. That is closer to what happens when a person is crying too hard to speak, and the mouth keeps trying anyway, out of habit, shaping words that never quite become audible. It is the body attempting to communicate something that has outgrown language. Most prayer, as people are taught to practice it, has a shape, a beginning, a request, an amen. Hannah's had none of that structure. It was closer to weather than to speech. Something moving through her because it needed to move, not because she had planned where it would go. Consider how long Hannah had been carrying this particular weight before that day. Years at minimum. Every one of those years she had gone home from the yearly festival with the same ache unemptied, packed back down inside her, because there had never been a moment or a place or a permission to let it fully out. You may have your own version of that. Not necessarily her particular grief, but something you have been carrying for years, silently, that gets reopened at predictable moments and packed back down each time, because there has never seemed to be a right occasion to let it fully out. Notice what Hannah did not do at that doorway. She did not compose a tidy summary of her situation. She did not organize her feelings into a clear, presentable request. Her lips moved and no sound came out, which suggests something closer to a wordless outpouring than a formal appeal. The grief itself, unedited, was the prayer. There is a grace in that which most people never give themselves permission to receive. The grace of not having to make your pain articulate before it is allowed to be heard. The grace of a wordless pouring being enough. Eli, once he understood he had misjudged her, softened immediately. He said something simple, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your request." Consider how quickly he changed his posture once he understood. He did not defend his mistake, or ask her to prove her sincerity, or demand an explanation for why she had looked the way she looked. He simply blessed her and let her go. That, too, is a small grace inside the story, easy to miss, because it happens in a single sentence. And then comes the detail that matters most for tonight. The text says Hannah went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Notice what had not happened yet. Her situation had not changed. Nothing about her actual circumstances was different than it had been an hour earlier. She still did not have what she had gone there aching for. The other wife's comments would still be waiting for her at home, and yet her face had changed. The heaviness had visibly lifted before any resolution had arrived. And consider what that means. The relief did not come from getting an answer. It came from the emptying itself, something about pouring the grief out fully, without holding any of it back to manage or present or explain, had already done something the eventual resolution had not yet done. That is worth sitting with tonight, because it runs against how most people think comfort works. Most people believe the heaviness lifts once the problem is solved. Hannah's story suggests something different. Sometimes the heaviness lifts simply because it was finally allowed to leave the body, regardless of whether the problem has moved an inch. You do not have to solve anything tonight to feel lighter. You do not need an answer before you are permitted relief. You only need somewhere to pour it. And the doorway does not require you to be articulate. It did not require Hannah to be articulate. It only required her to stop holding it in. Consider also what it means that Eli misread her entirely, and that his misreading did not disqualify what she was doing. He assumed the worst explanation available. She corrected him gently, without defensiveness, and kept going. The prayer had already done its work regardless of whether the one witnessing it understood what he was seeing. You do not need to be understood tonight either. You do not need someone in the room who correctly interprets the shape of your grief. Hannah poured hers out to someone who thought she was drunk, and the pouring worked anyway, because the pouring was never really about being understood by the witness. It was about the release itself. Consider how rarely most people do what Hannah did, not pray, empty. Most attempts at prayer are closer to reporting, a structured account of the situation, delivered to something assumed to already know it, with a request attached at the end. That is fine. It is not what she was doing. She was doing the thing you do at a kitchen table at midnight with somebody who loves you and has nowhere else to be. Not explaining, not requesting, just letting it come out in whatever shape it comes. Feel the doorway now in your imagination. Feel yourself standing at the edge of something larger than the room you are in. Feel your chest tight from carrying something for longer than you meant to carry it. And feel what it would be like to simply let it move. Not into words, necessarily. Not into an organized account of what is wrong, only into motion. Out of the chest, where it has been sitting, and into the air, where it no longer has to be held by muscle and breath alone. Consider that you do not need the right words for this. Hannah did not have them either. Her lips moved and nothing came out, and it was enough. It was, in fact, exactly what was needed. Not eloquence, not a well-formed argument for why her situation should change. Only the honest shape of what was inside her, allowed to move outward without translation. You do not have to explain it. You do not have to make it presentable. You only have to let it pour. Consider what a body does after that kind of pouring. It softens. The shoulders that had been braced against the ache come down slightly. The breath, which had been shallow and tight, deepens on its own. None of this requires belief or theology or even words. It is simply what a body does when something it has been holding is finally allowed to leave. You are held tonight by a grace that does not require your grief to be tidy before it is heard. The heaviness may lift before anything else changes. That is not a lesser kind of peace. It may be the truest kind there is, because it does not depend on circumstances cooperating first. Consider that Hannah's story is one of the very few places in that whole collection of books where a woman's interior life is described at this level of detail. Somebody thought it was worth recording exactly how she prayed and what her mouth was doing and what her face looked like afterward. That is unusual for a document that age. Most of what survives from that period is about kings and battles and property. Somebody decided this mattered. A woman standing in a doorway, saying nothing out loud, and then eating a meal. Let it pour tonight. Let your face change before your circumstances do. You are held in the pouring itself, not only in whatever comes after it. There is peace available at the doorway, tonight, regardless of what tomorrow brings. Consider what happened after Hannah went home. The story continues, but the part that matters here is small. She ate. That is the detail. After years of arriving at that festival and being unable to eat, she sat down and had a meal. That is what an emptied heart does to a body. It does not produce joy immediately. It does not resolve anything. It simply lets the ordinary functions resume. Appetite comes back. Sleep becomes possible. The body, which had been braced, unbraces. Notice that nobody had to tell her to eat. Nobody suggested she try to feel better. Her face changed and her appetite returned, in that order, without anyone managing the process. You may find something similar tonight, not resolution, just the small return of ordinary functions, the ability to lie still, the ability to breathe all the way out, the willingness of a body to stop bracing against something it can no longer do anything about. There is another story that points to the same emptying. There is a story in the older scriptures about a man watching his son-in-law work himself into the ground, and the plain, unspiritual thing he finally said about it. The son-in-law was Moses. By this point in the larger story, he had led a great many people out of a difficult situation and into open country, and now he was responsible, day after day, for keeping that entire community functioning. And one part of that responsibility had grown into something enormous. People brought him their disputes, every single one of them. If two neighbors disagreed about a boundary, they came to Moses. If a family argued over an inheritance, they came to Moses. If someone felt they had been wronged and needed a decision, there was one man they could bring it to. It was Moses. There was no one else doing this work alongside him. His father-in-law, a man named Jethro, came to visit during this period. He was not part of the daily grind of the camp. He had some distance, the way visiting relatives often do, and distance makes certain things visible that are invisible to the person living inside them. Jethro watched Moses for an entire day. The story is specific about this. He sat and observed from morning until evening as a line of people formed in front of Moses and stood there for hours, waiting their turn, while Moses sat and heard case after case after case, alone, without a single other person sharing the load. Consider the physical scene for a moment. A single man sitting under some kind of shelter or in the open from sunrise to sunset, listening to one dispute after another without pause. No lunch break implied in the text, no relief, just an unbroken line stretching back through the camp. Each person had waited hours already. Each one arrived with a problem that felt to them urgent enough to justify the wait. By evening, Moses would have been hoarse. His back would have ached from sitting in one position for so long. His mind would have been saturated with other people's grievances, unable to hold a single one of them with the attention it deserved, because there were simply too many and no space between them to recover. At the end of that day, Jethro asked him a direct question. "What is this thing you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone while all the people stand around you from morning until evening?" Moses explained. He said the people come to him to inquire of God. He said when they have a dispute, it comes to him, and he judges between the parties and makes known the statutes and laws. Notice the tone of his answer. There is no complaint in it. Moses does not describe this as a burden he resents. He describes it as simply what needs to happen, as though there were no other conceivable way for it to be done. He had likely stopped noticing at some point that the arrangement was unsustainable. When you are inside something long enough, the exhaustion becomes the baseline. You stop measuring against anything else. Consider Jethro's position for a moment. He was a visitor. He was not part of the community. He had no authority over anything happening in that camp. He also had no stake in Moses continuing to burn himself out. That is the useful thing about people from outside. They are not depending on your exhaustion. The people who benefit most from your overextension are frequently the least likely to point it out. That is not malice. It is just how systems work. If somebody is absorbing all the difficulty, the rest of the arrangement quietly adjusts around them and stops seeing it. Jethro saw it because he had just arrived. Jethro's response is worth hearing in full because it is remarkably direct for a story this old and remarkably free of any spiritual softening. He said, "What you are doing is not good. Not, this is admirable. Not, your dedication is inspiring. Not good." A flat assessment delivered by someone who loved him enough to say the unflattering thing plainly. He continued, "You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people with you. For the task is too heavy for you. You are not able to perform it alone. Not without help, not indefinitely." Consider how rare that sentence is, even now, even in ordinary conversation between people who care about each other. Most people, watching someone drowning in responsibility, offer sympathy instead of a diagnosis. They say, "That sounds so hard," or "I don't know how you do it." Jethro did something different. He told Moses plainly that the arrangement itself was the problem. Not Moses' stamina, not Moses' commitment, not Moses' worthiness. The structure was broken. No amount of personal strength was going to fix a structure. You will wear yourself out. Notice that Jethro did not frame this as a hypothetical risk. He stated it as a certainty. Not, you might burn out eventually. You will. It is only a matter of time, given the arithmetic of one man and an entire nation's disputes. There is a kind of clarity available from outside a situation that is almost never available from inside it. You may be, right now, in the middle of an arrangement that looks, from where you are standing, like simply what needs to happen. The late nights, the being the only one who checks on your parent, the being the one everyone in the family calls first, every time, about everything. From inside it, this can feel like the shape of your character, an identity rather than a structure. Jethro is here to tell you it may only be a structure, and a bad one, and that bad structures can be redesigned. Notice what Jethro proposed next, because it is entirely practical, with nothing mystical in it at all. He did not tell Moses to pray harder, or to trust more, or to simply endure with a better attitude. He told him to select capable people from among the community, people of good character, and to appoint them over smaller groups so that they could handle the minor disputes themselves, and only the truly difficult cases would need to come to Moses directly. He said, "If you do this, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will go to their place in peace." Consider that final phrase, in peace, not merely in efficiency, not merely in better organization, in peace. The redesign was not just about output, it was about the actual well-being of everyone involved, including the exhausted man at the center of it. Moses listened. This is the detail that matters most. He did not argue that his situation was uniquely demanding, that no one else could be trusted with the work, that he alone had to carry the whole thing because of who he was. He simply did what Jethro suggested. He selected capable people. He appointed them. He distributed the weight across many shoulders instead of concentrating it entirely on his own. Notice that nothing about Moses' importance diminished because of this. He did not stop being the leader. He did not become less necessary. He became sustainable, which is a different and better thing. You may have been carrying an entire community of disputes on your own for a long time. Not literal legal disputes, the emotional equivalent. Being the one who absorbs everyone's difficulty, everyone's need, everyone's crisis, with no one appointed alongside you to take the smaller matters, so that only the truly heavy ones reach you. Consider what that looks like in an ordinary life. The sibling who handles every family emergency because the others have quietly learned not to. The employee who fields every question because asking her is easier than looking anything up. The friend who has become, without ever agreeing to it, the designated listener for an entire circle of people. None of them think to ask how she is doing. She has never given them a reason to wonder. None of those people signed up formally for the role. It simply accumulated, the way Moses' line of disputes accumulated, one case at a time, until an entire structure had built itself around the assumption that this person would always be available, always capable, always the one to ask. There is a grace in Jethro's visit that is easy to miss because it looks so ordinary. He did not perform a miracle. He did not offer Moses a vision or a sign. He simply watched and cared enough to say the plain thing and offered a practical structure for sharing the load. Sometimes grace arrives exactly like that, not dramatic, just someone with enough distance to see what you cannot see from inside your own exhaustion, telling you the truth kindly. You do not have to solve your entire structure tonight. You do not have to identify at this hour who your Jethro might be, or what your version of appointing capable helpers would look like. You only have to hear tonight that the exhaustion you are carrying may not be a measure of your devotion. It may simply be evidence of a structure that was never meant to rest on one person alone. Feel the weight of that distinction settling for a moment. Not, I am weak for being tired. Only, the arrangement was too heavy for any single person, and someone finally said so out loud. Consider what Moses' evenings looked like after the redesign. Fewer people in line, fewer disputes reaching him directly, more of them settled by capable people entrusted with smaller portions of the work. He still had responsibility. He was still needed. But the weight had been distributed the way weight is meant to be distributed, across many shoulders instead of one exhausted pair. You are held tonight by the same permission Jethro gave Moses. The permission to admit that what you have been doing is not good, not because you are failing, but because no single person was built to carry an entire community of need alone. There is rest available in that admission. There is peace in a structure finally allowed to change. That admission is itself a kind of grace. offered by someone who cared enough to say the plain thing. The way Jethro cared enough to interrupt a lifetime of Moses, simply enduring. You do not need a Jethro standing beside your bed tonight to receive the same grace. You only need to let the sentence land. What you have been doing is not good. It is not a reflection of your worth, and it can change. Consider what the appointed people gained from the arrangement, because the story usually gets read as being about Moses. Before Jethro's suggestion, there were thousands of capable people in that community doing nothing with their capability. They stood in line like everyone else. Their opinion was never asked for. Afterward, a great many of them had responsibility and were trusted and became the kind of person other people came to. Refusing to share a load does not only exhaust the one carrying it, it also quietly withholds something from everyone who might have helped. Let the weight be redistributed tonight, even if only in your imagination for now. Rest into that image. Let there be other capable hands, appointed and willing, taking up the smaller matters so that only the heaviest ones reach you, and even those shared. There is another story that points to the same sharing. There is a story in the Gospels about a man who could not walk, and the 4 friends who decided that a locked door was not going to be the end of the matter. He had been unable to walk for a long time. The text does not say how long. It does not say what had caused it, only that it had gone on long enough that everyone in his town knew him as the man who could not walk. That had become the whole of how people saw him. Not his name, not his family, just the mat and the legs that did not work, and the years of being carried from place to place by whoever happened to be willing that day. Consider what that does to a person over time, to be known primarily by what you cannot do, to watch the town go on around you, market days, festivals, ordinary errands, while you remain in the same place, dependent on the goodwill of others, simply to move from one room to another. There is a particular exhaustion in that kind of dependency, different from the exhaustion of the 4 friends who carried him. His was the exhaustion of never being able to arrive anywhere under his own power, of always waiting for someone else's schedule, someone else's willingness, someone else's strength, before anything could change in his day at all. Word had spread that a teacher known for healing people was in a house nearby, not a grand house, an ordinary one in a small town, the kind with a flat roof and a single door, the kind where a crowd could gather outside faster than anyone could control it. By the time the man's 4 friends arrived, carrying him on a mat between them, the house was already full. Not just full, packed to the doorway and out into the street. People stood shoulder to shoulder, unwilling to give up their spot for anyone. Consider what that must have felt like from the mat, being carried through a town by 4 friends, arriving at the one place that might help, and finding the door simply impossible to reach. Not because anyone had refused you, because too many others had gotten there first. That is its own particular kind of heaviness, not being turned away, being unreachable, the help existing, visibly, on the other side of a wall of people, with no way through. The 4 friends did not leave. They did not decide. The crowd was too much and turned back. They did not set their friend down at the edge of the crowd and tell him they had tried. Instead, they did something that required considerable effort and no small amount of nerve. They carried him up onto the roof, up, not through. Flat-roofed houses in that region were built with an external staircase. Roofs were made of branches and packed earth over wooden beams, the kind of roof that could, with effort, be opened up from above. The 4 men climbed up, carrying their friend and his mat between them, and began to dig through the roof directly above where the teacher was speaking. Consider the labor of this. 4 grown men on a roof tearing apart the covering of someone else's house. In full view of a packed crowd below, their friend lay on his mat waiting for them to finish. Dust and debris fell into the room. The teacher's voice, presumably, kept speaking even as the ceiling above him began to open. Everyone below looked up, confused, then understanding, then watching as an opening widened directly above the crowd. That is not a subtle plan. It is not an elegant one. It is 4 exhausted, determined men doing something loud and disruptive and slightly ridiculous. The alternative was giving up. Consider the man on the mat during all of this. He could not help with the digging. He could not climb. He could not carry. He could not contribute anything at all to the effort happening around him. He could only lie still, on his back, looking up at the sky through a widening hole. Notice what that must have asked of him. Not effort, only stillness. Only trusting 4 sets of hands he had known his whole life to get the details right. There is a particular kind of peace available in that position, once a person stops fighting it. The peace of having nothing to do. The peace of being entirely in someone else's hands and finding they are steady. Rest is sometimes exactly that. Not recovery after effort. Simply the absence of anything being required of you while others work. When the opening was wide enough, they lowered their friend down on ropes through the hole in the roof directly into the middle of the room. He landed in front of the teacher. The crowd watched from below. Dust from the broken roof settled around them. Here is the detail in the story that matters most for tonight. The text says that when the teacher saw their faith, he responded to the man on the mat. Their faith, not his. Consider how remarkable that is. The man on the mat had not climbed a ladder. He had not torn open a roof. He had not done anything at all. He only lay still. Other people carried him, first through the streets, then up a staircase, then through a hole they had dug themselves. Every ounce of effort in this story belongs to the 4 friends, and yet the response came because of what they believed, not because of anything the man on the mat had proven about his own faith. That is worth sitting with for a long moment. It runs against nearly everything most people have absorbed about how these things are supposed to work. Many people believe, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that the outcome depends on the strength of their own faith, that if they are struggling, doubting, too tired to believe anything with real conviction, then whatever they are hoping for is somehow less available to them. That belief steals a great deal of peace from people who are already running low on it. This story says something different. It says that sometimes what carries you through is not your faith. It is the faith of the people who love you enough to carry you when you cannot move yourself. Their willingness to climb the roof. Their willingness to dig through it with their bare hands. Their refusal to accept a locked door as the final answer. You may be tonight the man on the mat, too heavy in your own heart to have climbed anything, too tired to have argued your way through any crowd, too worn down to muster the kind of vivid conviction that gets described in stories. That is not a disqualification. It never was. The man in this story contributed nothing but his own stillness. It was enough because other people believed on his behalf. Consider who your 4 friends might be tonight, even if you cannot picture their faces clearly at this hour. Someone who has prayed for you without your knowing. Someone who has carried a version of your situation in their own heart. Worried about you at their own kitchen table, on a night when you had no idea anyone was thinking of you at all. Their faith does not require your participation to matter. It was never contingent on you noticing it. There is a grace in that arrangement which asks nothing further of you tonight. You do not have to work up belief you do not currently have. You do not have to climb anything, or dig through anything, or prove your sincerity to anyone. You only have to be willing to be carried. The man on the mat was willing. It required nothing more from him than not resisting the four men who had already decided to get him there. Notice also what happened to the roof. It was left open, broken in front of everyone, evidence of exactly how far his friends had been willing to go. Nobody quietly repaired it before the story continued. The hole stayed there, visible, a testament to effort that had been made loudly and without embarrassment. You do not need to hide the fact that you have needed carrying. The roof stayed open, the mess stayed visible. None of it diminished what happened in that room. Nothing about it needed to be tidied away before it counted. Consider that the four friends had to carry him back down as well. The story ends with him walking, but before that, there was a practical problem nobody mentions. They were on a roof. He was in the room below. They had to come down the outside staircase, through the crowd, to get to him. Whatever happened in that house, the friends were not present for the moment itself. They were up on the roof, looking down through a hole, watching from a distance. That is often the position of the people who carry someone. They do the work, and then they are not in the room for the outcome. They hear about it afterward. Feel the mat beneath you now in your imagination. Feel yourself being carried, not walking, not climbing, only being carried by hands that decided this mattered enough to dig through a roof for. Feel the dust falling. Feel the ropes lowering you slowly, carefully, into a room you could never have reached on your own. Feel the faces below, upturned, watching. Some in the room had believed for you long before you arrived. You are held tonight by faith that is not entirely your own. That is not a lesser kind of holding. It may be the sturdiest kind there is, because it does not depend on your strength holding out. It depends on love that dug through a roof rather than accept a locked door. Notice that you do not have to identify, right now, whose faith is carrying you. You do not have to know their names or confirm that they are thinking of you tonight, or prove any of it to your own satisfaction. The four friends did not ask the man on the mat to verify their commitment before they started digging. They simply dug. There is a grace in being carried by people who never once required your participation. Grace does not usually announce itself with fanfare. It arrives, more often, as an ordinary friend deciding that a locked door is not going to be the final word, and doing something about it without waiting for permission. Consider how the man on the mat must have felt about being carried before that day. Probably not grateful, probably something more complicated. Being carried is not comfortable emotionally, even when it is necessary. There is dependence in it, and the awareness of being a logistical problem for people you love. Most people who need carrying spend a fair amount of energy apologizing for it. Notice that no apology appears anywhere in this story. Nobody asks him to be sorry. The friends do not appear to require it. The whole episode proceeds as though his need were simply a fact about the situation rather than a debt he was accumulating. Rest on the mat. You do not have to carry yourself tonight. There is peace in arriving exactly the way this man arrived, lowered by hands that never once asked whether he deserved the effort. Rest in the fact that you were carried before you knew you needed to be. Consider what the four friends did after the man walked out of that house on his own legs. the story does not follow them. They disappear from the text entirely. Nobody records their names. There is no scene where they are thanked publicly, or where anyone acknowledges that the entire episode happened, because four ordinary men decided a locked door was not the end of it. They presumably went home. They presumably had to explain to someone why they had destroyed a section of a neighbor's roof. They presumably paid for the repair. Notice how little the story cares about crediting them. And notice that they did not appear to need it. They came to carry their friend, they carried him, and then they went back to their lives. Most of the people who have carried you have done the same thing. They did not stay for the acknowledgement. Many of them have no idea that what they did mattered as much as it did. There is another story that points to the same carrying. Consider how many small, practical mercies get passed hand to hand like this, without ever being written down. A cousin gives someone a box. A neighbor mentions the thing that helped her. A grandmother shows a grandchild what to do with a jar of water and some soil. None of it appears in any official record. All of it works. There is a story sometimes told about a woman who kept a wooden box under her bed and what she put inside it every night before she slept. Nobody remembers her name. It is one of those stories that travels between women in kitchens and between old friends on porches, passed along by people who found it useful and thought someone else might too. She was in her 50s when the story takes place, old enough to have accumulated the particular kind of worry that does not resolve, only rotates. She had raised children who were grown now and living far enough away that she worried about them without being able to do anything about it. She had a husband whose health had begun to concern her. She had a small business that never quite failed and never quite succeeded, which is its own particular kind of exhausting. For years, she had slept badly, not because of noise or discomfort or anything in the room, because of the list. Everyone with a heavy heart knows the list. It arrives around the time the lights go out. It is not organized. It does not come in order of importance. It simply produces item after item, each one urgent, each one impossible to act on at that hour, each one demanding to be turned over one more time before you are permitted to sleep. She had tried the ordinary remedies: warm milk, reading, getting up and doing something useful until she was tired enough that the list could not keep her awake. None of it worked for long. Then one autumn she was visiting an older cousin and mentioned almost in passing that she had not slept properly in years. The cousin did not offer advice. She got up, went to a cupboard, and came back with a small wooden box. It was plain, unpainted, the kind of box that had probably held tools or buttons at some point in its life. She said, "Take this home and take a pencil and some paper." Then she explained, "Every night, before getting into bed, write down whatever is on the list, not neatly, not in sentences, just the thing, a name, a word, a phrase, one line per worry. Then fold the paper, put it in the box, close the lid, and slide the box under the bed." And then she said the part that mattered. "In the morning, if you still want it, you can take it back out." The woman thought this was slightly ridiculous. She said so. Her cousin agreed that it was ridiculous and told her to do it anyway. So she did. That evening, she sat on the edge of her bed with a pencil and a page torn from a shopping pad, feeling foolish. The house was quiet. Her husband was already asleep. The lamp made a small circle of light on the bedspread. The first night she wrote 11 things: her son's job situation, her husband's cough, a conversation with a supplier that had gone badly, money, the roof. Several other items she was almost embarrassed to write down because they looked so small on paper compared to how large they felt in the dark. She folded the paper. She put it in the box. She slid the box under the bed. She lay down. And something surprising happened. Not immediately, not completely, but the list, when it started up, kept running into a small obstacle. Each item, as it arrived, met the same quiet response. That one is already in the box. It did not silence the list. It slowed it down. The mind, which had been operating as though it were the only thing preventing catastrophe, now had somewhere to put things. And a mind with somewhere to put things is a different mind from one that believes it must hold everything at once. She slept a little better that night, and better still the next. Notice that nothing in her life had improved. Not one circumstance had shifted. Only the location of the list had changed, and her body had responded to that as though something real had happened. Because something real had happened. Here is the detail from the story that people remember, and the reason it gets told at all. In the morning, she never took anything out. Not once. Not in the years she kept doing this. She would wake up, and the box would be there under the bed, and she would look at it, and she would simply not need to open it. Whatever had been urgent at 11 at night was manageable at 7 in the morning, in daylight, with a cup of coffee and a body that had rested. The papers accumulated. After a few years, the box was full. She emptied it into the fire one afternoon without reading any of them and started again. Consider that detail. Years of accumulated 3 in the morning terror burned unread because none of it had turned out to require her nighttime attention after all. Not one page, not one item. Thousands of hours of vigilance, none of which had been necessary. All of it converted into a single afternoon of ash. She was not careless. She loved the people on those lists. That was never in question. The love was real. The nighttime holding of it simply turned out to be optional. Consider what the box actually did. It did not solve anything. Not one item on any of those lists was resolved by being written down and shut in a wooden container. Her son's job situation worked itself out, or did not, entirely independently of the box. What the box did was give the weight a place to be that was not her chest. Notice how much of a heavy heart is location rather than content. The same worry, held in the chest at 2 in the morning, feels unbearable. The same worry, written on a line of paper inside a closed box under a bed, is simply a sentence in a box. Nothing about it changed, only where it was being kept. There is a grace in that discovery, and it costs nothing. You do not have to make the worry smaller, you only have to move it. Notice how much of nighttime heaviness is not the problem itself, but the sensation of having to hold it. The mind at 2 in the morning is not actually working on solutions. It is standing guard. It has confused vigilance with responsibility, and it will not stand down until something convinces it that the watch is covered. The box convinced it, not with logic, with a gesture. Consider how much of human life runs on gestures like that. A handshake at the end of an agreement, a ring on a finger, a door closed at the end of a workday. None of those things accomplish anything by themselves. All of them tell the body that something has been settled, and the body believes them, because the body has always trusted physical things more than it trusts arguments. The mind at 2 in the morning is not accessible by argument. It is accessible by gesture. That is why the box works and reasoning does not. That is worth understanding, because it explains why simply telling yourself to stop worrying never works. You cannot argue a mind out of standing guard, but you can sometimes Show it that the post has been handed off. Something physical, something outside your body, a closed lid. There is a grace in being allowed to use something that simple. Nothing about this requires belief or discipline or a change in your character. It requires a piece of paper and a container and a willingness to be slightly ridiculous for a few minutes before bed. You may not have a wooden box. It does not matter. A drawer works. An envelope works. A shoebox on the top shelf of a closet works. One woman who heard this story used a jar with a lid, and another used the pocket of a coat she never wore. The container is not the point. The point is the gesture of transfer made deliberately, so the body understands that something has moved from inside to outside. Consider how many nights you have spent standing that same watch, turning the same 3 or 4 items over in the dark with no new information available, as though the turning were a form of care. It felt like care. It has never once been care. It has only ever been holding. Consider what you would write tonight if you had the paper. Not the solutions, just the names of the things. The ones that have been circling since the lights went out. Each one line. And then consider the lid closing over them. Nothing has been abandoned. Nothing has been lost. The box is right there, under the bed, 3 feet away. In the morning, if you still want any of it, you can take it back. You almost certainly will not. Consider what she would have written on the worst nights, not the manageable items, the ones she could barely put on paper. The story says she wrote everything. That was the rule she had been given, not just the safe worries, the one about her husband, the one about her son she never said out loud to anyone. There is something in the physical act of writing a fear in plain words that reduces it slightly. Not because writing is magic, because a fear held in the body has no edges, and a fear written on a line has exactly as many words as it has, and no more. Feel the box now in your imagination. Feel the rough, unpainted wood. Feel the small weight of it in your hands. Feel the folded paper going in, and the lid coming down, and the soft sound it makes when it closes. Feel yourself sliding it under the bed, into the dark, where it will sit patiently until morning without asking anything of you. Feel your chest, where all of it was sitting a moment ago. Feel the space there now. You are held tonight by something that does not need you to keep watch. The list is in the box. The box is under the bed. The morning will come, and it will bring daylight. And the daylight will make most of those items smaller in a way no amount of thinking at this hour ever could. Consider what the cousin knew that made her hand over the box instead of advice. She did not say, "Try not to worry." She did not explain that most worries never come to pass, which is true and has never helped anyone at 2 in the morning. She did not offer perspective. She gave a physical object and a set of instructions simple enough to follow while exhausted. That is a particular kind of wisdom, and it usually comes from people who have been through the same thing and found that words were not sufficient. Rest now. Rest without standing guard. Rest the way a person rests when the watch has been handed to someone else. The lid is closed. There is peace in a closed lid. There is grace in a morning that will arrive whether or not you supervise its approach. Consider the morning after a night with the box. She would wake up, and the first thing she noticed was not relief exactly. It was more like mild surprise. The recognition that she had slept, and that the world had continued, and that nothing in the box had needed her overnight attention. Over months, that recognition accumulated into something like trust. Not trust in an outcome, Trust in the mechanism, the knowledge built from evidence that things placed in the box at 11 were still manageable at 7. That is how the practice actually works, not through one dramatic night of surrender, through a slow accumulation of mornings where nothing collapsed. You will not get that accumulation tonight. Tonight is only the first night, or another first night, and the mind will be skeptical. Let it be skeptical. Put the thing in the box anyway. There is another story that points to the same handing over. There is a line in one of the old songs that uses a very specific word, and the word comes from the world of caravans and long journeys. The line says, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you." Consider that this song was written by someone who was, by his own description, in serious trouble at the time. It is not a peaceful poem written from a comfortable study. It is full of complaint. It describes betrayal by a friend, and fear, and the wish to escape. And in the middle of it, that line, "Cast your burden on the Lord." It is not offered as a general principle by someone at rest. It is offered as a practical instruction by someone in difficulty to himself in the middle of the difficulty. Consider the word cast. In the old language, it does not mean set down gently. It does not mean release. It means throw. To cast something is to send it away from you with force towards something else and let it land there. That is a strange verb to use about grief. But the people who first heard this line would have recognized it immediately because they knew what it looked like at the end of a day's travel. Consider how a caravan worked. A group of traders crossed open country together. They moved between towns. They carried goods on the backs of camels and donkeys. Some travelers walked, some rode, and each person carried something of their own besides the freight. A personal bundle, food, a blanket, whatever they needed for the road. Consider what that walk was actually like. Hot for most of the year, dusty in a way that got into the mouth and the eyes and stayed there. Long stretches with nothing to look at but the back of the animal in front of you. Conversation in the early hours, then silence as the day wore on and people ran out of things to say. They would walk from early morning until the light started to go. And at the end of the day, when they reached the place they had chosen to stop, there was a routine. The animals were brought in. The drivers moved down the line. Each traveler lifted their own bundle off their shoulder and handed it over, or threw it up onto the pile. The drivers took it from there, unloading, sorting, stacking, watching over it through the night. The traveler's part was finished. The bundle was no longer their responsibility. Somebody whose actual job it was had taken it. And then the traveler would eat and find a place to lie down and sleep on the ground under an enormous sky with nothing on their shoulder and nothing to guard in the middle of open country in a world that was not particularly safe. They slept anyway, every night for the whole length of the journey, because the handing over was real and the drivers were real, and the arrangement had been working for as long as anyone could remember. That is the picture behind the line. Cast your burden. Throw it up onto the pile at the end of the day, the way you would at a caravan stop, and let the ones whose work it is take over the night shift. Notice what does not happen in that image. The traveler does not carry the bundle to their sleeping mat. Nobody keeps it under their arm all night. That would be strange. It would also be exhausting, and it would accomplish nothing. The bundle is not going anywhere. There are people awake specifically to watch it. And yet that is exactly what most people do with their hearts. Consider the particular shape of it. You get into bed, your body stops, and then, quietly, the whole day's freight comes back up onto your shoulder, item by item, and you lie there in the dark holding all of it, hours after any of it could have been acted on. Nobody would do this with a physical object. If you carried a sack of grain all day, you would not bring it to bed. The absurdity would be obvious. It is only invisible because the weight of a heart cannot be seen from outside. You may have handed off almost everything you carry, at least in theory. You may believe, when asked directly, that your situation is not entirely in your hands. And then the lights go out and the bundle comes right back up onto your shoulder, and you lie there holding it as though the entire caravan depended on your grip. Consider the second half of that line, because it is where the promise actually sits. He will sustain you. Not he will fix it, not he will explain it, not he will remove the thing you are worried about by morning. Sustain, which means hold up, keep in place, prevent from collapsing. That is a smaller promise than most people want. It is also more useful at 2 a.m. It is about you rather than about the situation. It says nothing about outcomes. It says only that you will be held up while the outcome is still unknown. There is a grace in a promise built that way. It does not require the future to cooperate before it takes effect. It is available tonight, in the dark, in exactly the situation you are actually in. Notice also that the casting is described as something you do repeatedly, not once, permanently, in a single decisive act of surrender. Every evening, at every stop, the bundle comes off and goes onto the pile. The next morning it comes back because you are still traveling and you still have things to carry. And then, at the next stop, you hand it over again. Notice how much pressure comes off when the practice is understood that way. Nobody expects you to hand something over permanently at 2 a.m. and never pick it up again. That is not what is being asked. What is being asked is a single evening's handoff, tonight, for tonight only. That is a relief. If you have ever felt that you failed at letting something go because you had to let it go again the following week, you have not failed. The bundle was always going to come back in the morning. That is what a bundle does. The practice is not one heroic release. The practice is a nightly handoff, repeated for as long as the journey lasts. Consider what the drivers at a caravan stop would have thought of a traveler who insisted on holding his own bundle all night. They would not have found it admirable. They would have found it slightly sad and probably a little insulting, since it would suggest he did not trust them to do the one thing they were there for. You may be that traveler tonight, not out of stubbornness, out of habit and love and the long-held belief that your holding is what keeps the people you love safe. It does not. It never has. The night watch was covered before you ever arrived at the camp. There is a grace in being unnecessary to the night shift. It sounds like a demotion. It is closer to a release. You were never the reason the camp stayed safe. You were only a traveler who had walked a long way and needed to sleep. Rest is what the traveler does at the stop, not because the work is finished, because the work has been handed to someone whose turn it is. Consider what it costs to hand something over to someone whose competence you have not verified. That is the actual difficulty, and it is worth naming, honestly. Most people do not lie awake because they enjoy it. They lie awake because handing over feels like a risk, and the risk feels larger at night, and the mind would rather stay uncomfortable than trust something it cannot inspect. The caravan drivers did not offer credentials. The travelers handed over their bundles anyway, every evening. because that was the arrangement and because they were tired. Tiredness is a legitimate reason. It has always been a legitimate reason. Feel the end of the day now in your imagination. Feel the dust on your legs and the ache across your shoulders from a long walk. Feel the light going amber and low across open country. Feel the caravan slowing, the animals being brought in, the ordinary noise of people setting up for the night. Feel the bundle on your shoulder. Feel its weight and its shape and the exact place on your back where it has been pressing since morning. Now feel yourself lifting it off, not carefully, not with ceremony. Feel yourself swinging it up onto the pile with the others, the way a tired person does at the end of a long day, and turning away without watching where it lands. Feel the space where it was. Feel the muscle along the top of your shoulder, which has been braced all day, discovering that it has nothing left to brace against. Feel the ground under you. Feel the sky over you, enormous and indifferent in the best possible way. Feel the ordinary sounds of a camp settling for the night, none of which require your attention. You are held tonight by a promise that does not depend on tomorrow going well. It only says you will be sustained, held up, kept from collapsing while the journey continues and the outcome stays unknown. Consider what the word sustain actually does in that promise. It is not a word about outcomes. A structure is sustained when it does not collapse. A person is sustained when they keep going. Neither of those says anything about the situation improving. That is a modest promise. It is also, at this hour, the only one that would be believable. A promise that everything will resolve well would not survive contact with a mind at 2 a.m. that knows better. Sustain will survive it. Sustain is small enough to be true. Rest without your bundle. Rest without checking on it. Someone whose job it is has the night shift and has had it every night of your life, including all the nights you stayed awake to help. There is peace in an empty shoulder. There is grace in a pile someone else is watching. There is another story that points to the same handing over. There is a short song in the older scriptures that is mostly about building things and about how much of the building is actually yours. Consider who the song is traditionally attributed to: a king, specifically the one who built the most famous building in that country's history, and who therefore knew, better than almost anyone, exactly how much human effort a large construction requires. That is worth holding. This is not a song written by someone who never worked hard. It was written by someone who had overseen enormous projects and had drawn a conclusion from the experience. It opens like this: "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain." And then it says something that lands directly on a person lying awake at this hour. "It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep." Consider that phrase, the bread of anxious toil. It describes a very particular thing, not work. Work is fine. Work is often good. This is something else. This is the meal you eat standing up quickly while thinking about the next task, the lunch you do not taste, the dinner during which you are somewhere else entirely, running numbers in your head, rehearsing a conversation you are dreading. It is possible to eat that way for years without noticing. The body gets fed. Nothing is actually nourishing. Notice that the song does not describe this as a moral failure. It describes it as futility, in vain, which is gentler and also more precise. Nobody eating the bread of anxious toil is doing anything wrong. They are simply working very hard at something that does not produce what they are hoping it will produce. The word in vain appears 3 times in the opening lines: building in vain, watching in vain, rising early, and going late to rest in vain. It is not a scolding. It is an observation repeated 3 times by someone who watched a lot of exhausted people and wanted to say something about it. The song is written from the perspective of someone watching a builder. Picture the scene. A man building a house in a village. He is up before dawn. He works through the heat of the day, and then, when the light goes, he does not stop. He lights a lamp and goes back out to check the walls. He walks the perimeter. He presses a hand against the stonework. He looks at the joins. He stands in the half-built doorway and thinks about the roof and the winter and whether the money will hold. The village is asleep. His family is asleep, and he is out there in the dark with a lamp, examining walls that will not change between now and morning. He has done this most nights for a year. His wife has stopped asking. The children were small when the foundation went in, and they are not small anymore. The house is nearly finished. He is not. There is a version of him in almost every family. Sometimes it is the man with the lamp. Sometimes it is the woman who cleans a kitchen that is already clean. Sometimes it is the person who reopens the laptop at 11, not to work, but to look at the work. Consider what he is actually doing. He is not building. Nothing is being constructed at that hour. He is inspecting. And inspection past a certain point is not diligence. It is anxiety wearing the costume of responsibility. You may recognize the posture even if you have never built a house. It is the same thing as rereading the email you already sent, checking the bank balance you checked 2 hours ago, going over the conversation with your son one more time, looking for a detail that would change how it turned out. None of it constructs anything. All of it feels like it might. That is the trap, and it is a good one. The feeling of doing something is nearly identical to the feeling of doing something useful. The body cannot tell them apart at this hour. Only the morning can, and by then the checking has already cost a night. Notice what the song does not say. It does not say the building is pointless. It does not say the watchman should abandon his post, or that the builder should stop building. Houses still need to be built. Cities still need watchmen. It says the building is in vain unless something larger is also building, which is a claim about what your effort is resting on, not a claim that your effort is worthless. Consider the watchman in the same opening line. A city watchman had a real job. Someone had to stand on the wall. The song does not say the wall should be left unwatched. It says the watchman stays awake in vain if the watching is all that is holding the city. Both figures in the song are doing legitimate work. Neither is being told to stop. Both are being told the same thing, that the thing they are protecting was never resting entirely on them. That distinction matters at this hour because the exhausted mind hears every relief as an accusation. It hears, "You do not need to work so hard," as, "Your work does not matter." That is not what is being said. The work matters. The work simply was never the only thing holding the house up. And then the last line, which is the reason this song has been read aloud in dark rooms for 3,000 years. He gives to his beloved sleep. Consider the grammar of that. Sleep is described as a gift, not an achievement, not a reward for having finished, not something you earn by getting through your list. A gift given to someone who is loved for no reason other than that they are loved. That is a different frame than most people bring to their own rest. Most people treat sleep as the thing that happens after they have done enough, which means, functionally, that they never quite qualify, because there is always more. The song reverses it. Sleep is not what you get for finishing. Sleep is what is handed to you tonight, unfinished, because of who is doing the handing and who you are to them. There is a grace in that reversal which is hard to accept and easy to feel. You do not have to have earned tonight's rest. That has never been the arrangement. The list is not complete. The house is not finished. The walls have not been fully inspected, and the gift is being offered anyway. Notice also the word beloved, not the diligent, not the deserving, not the ones who manage their time well, beloved, which is a category you fall into by being, not by performing. That is what grace means, stripped of everything decorative, a gift given on the basis of who someone is to the giver, not on the basis of what they produced this week. You are inside that category tonight, whether or not the house is finished. Consider the builder again, out in the dark with his lamp. Somewhere in the village behind him, his own bed is empty. His wife is asleep. The children are asleep. And the house he is inspecting will be exactly the same in the morning, stone for stone, whether he stands there all night or goes inside. Consider what it would take for him to go inside, not a resolution. Nothing about the house would be different. The roof would still be unbuilt. The money would still be uncertain. Winter would still be coming. The only thing that would have to change is his belief about what his standing there accomplishes. At some point in the story the song is telling, he blows out the lamp and goes in. Not because the work is done, because he has finally understood that the walls are not being held up by his attention. Consider what his family thought of the lamp. They would have seen the light moving along the wall from inside the house every night, a small yellow point going back and forth in the dark. They would not have felt protected by it. They would have felt worried about him. The vigil that a person keeps for their family is almost never experienced by that family as care. It is experienced as absence. That is a hard thing to hear and worth hearing once. The hours you have spent lying awake on behalf of the people you love have not reached them. They cannot reach them. They only reach you. Feel the lamp in your hand now, in your imagination. Feel the small circle of light it makes on the half-built wall. Feel the cool of the evening on your arms, and the tiredness in your legs, and the pull of the house behind you where a bed is waiting. Feel yourself standing there a moment longer, the way you always do. And then feel the breath that puts the lamp out. Feel the dark settling over the walls, which are still standing. Feel yourself turning away from them. Feel the door of the house and the warmth inside it, and the fact that nothing collapsed while you were not looking. You are held tonight by a builder who does not stop when you do. The house is not resting on your inspection. It never was. Consider the last part of that song, which most people never reach because the famous line comes earlier. It goes on to talk about children, and about a full house, and about the ordinary continuation of a family across generations. It ends in domestic warmth rather than in theology. That is where the song thinks all of this is heading, not toward a philosophical point about effort, toward a house with people in it, at night asleep, while the one who built it finally sleeps too. Rest now, unfinished. Sleep is a gift. It is being given to you tonight, not because you completed anything, but because of who is giving it. There is peace in receiving something you did not earn. There is grace in a night that arrives before the work is done. Consider what a caravan camp sounded like after the unloading was done. Fires, low conversation, animals settling, somebody laughing at the far end of the camp about something that would not be funny in the morning. The particular relaxed noise of people who have finished walking for the day. And underneath it, the drivers moving around the stacked freight, doing their rounds, checking ropes, doing the job that let everyone else stop. Nobody in that camp lay awake feeling badly about the drivers. Nobody thought, I should really be out there helping. It was simply understood that some people walk and some people watch, and the arrangement works because nobody tries to do both. You may need to hear that specifically. The night shift is not short-staffed. Your presence there has never been required, and lying awake has never once counted as helping. There is another story that points to the same giving. Consider one more thing about the builder before we leave him. The house did get finished, not because of the night inspections, because of the ordinary daylight work, done in the ordinary way, over ordinary months. Every hour he spent out there with a lamp was subtracted from the sleep that would have made the next day's work easier. The nights did not add to the house, they took from it. That is the arithmetic nobody notices while they are doing it. Anxious vigilance feels like an addition. It is almost always a subtraction, borrowed against tomorrow. There is one more image to hold before the night gets much later. It is not a story with people in it. It is only a river in autumn doing what rivers do. Picture a river in a wooded country, not a large one. The kind you could wade across in summer, but deep enough in the middle that it moves with real weight. It runs past the edge of a village, under a stone bridge, and out through fields towards somewhere further away. It is autumn. The trees along the bank have started to let go of their leaves. Yellow ones, rust-colored ones, a few that are still half green. Consider what happens when a leaf falls into that river. It does not swim. It does not paddle. It does not do anything at all. It touches the surface and the water takes it immediately and completely and carries it downstream. The leaf makes no effort. It has no capacity for effort. It has no muscles, no intention, no strategy for staying afloat. And yet it moves, steadily, for miles sometimes. Past the bridge, past the fields, around the bend where the willows are, further than any leaf could possibly travel on its own. Notice that the river does not strain to carry it. A leaf weighs nothing to a river. 10,000 leaves weigh nothing. The river does not slow down. It does not notice. It has been carrying whatever falls into it for longer than the village has existed, and the leaves are the lightest thing it handles all year. Consider what else that river carries. Branches, silt, rain from 3 counties. Whatever came down in the last storm. The leaf is not a burden on that system. It is barely a rounding error. Consider how old the arrangement is. That water has been moving through that valley since long before the village was there. It moved through in centuries when nobody watched it. It moved through winters when it froze at the edges and kept going underneath. It has never once required anyone's attention to keep flowing. Every leaf that has ever fallen into it has been carried. Not most of them, all of them. There is no leaf in the history of that river that fell in and was refused. That is the first thing to sit with. What feels enormous inside your chest tonight is not enormous to what is carrying it. There is a grace in that arithmetic. Not the grace of being told your worry is small, which is never comforting and usually untrue. The grace of discovering that the thing carrying it is very large. Those are different sentences. The first one dismisses you. The second one holds you. You may have been treating your heart's weight as though it were the maximum load, as though handing it over would be asking a great deal of somebody, as though there might be a limit somewhere and you might be close to it. The river does not have that limit. The leaf never asked. It simply fell in and was carried and did not know it was being carried. Consider a second thing, the leaf that resists. Sometimes a leaf catches on a root at the edge of the bank. It gets held there, half in the current, spinning in place. The water keeps moving past it. The leaf stays exactly where it is, trembling, going nowhere, while the river continues around it in both directions. That is what holding on looks like from the outside. Not stillness, not safety. Just a small thing vibrating against a current that would carry it if it let go. The leaves that make it to the sea are the ones that never gripped anything. Notice that the caught leaf is not doing anything wrong. It did not choose the route. It simply drifted close to the edge on a day when the current was slow and something snagged, and now it is stuck. That is not a failure of character. It is just what happens near banks. And notice how it comes free, not through effort. The water rises slightly, or the root shifts, or the leaf tears a little at the edge, and then it is moving again, downstream, as though nothing had happened. Notice that this is not a story about giving up. The leaf is not resigning from anything. It is not choosing to stop caring about where it ends up. It simply never had the ability to steer, and finally stops pretending otherwise and discovers that the not steering was never what was keeping it afloat. You have been swimming for a long time in water that was already going your direction. Notice how tiring that is. Not the current, the swimming. The current costs nothing. It is the effort of trying to move a body through water that was already moving it that leaves a person exhausted by 2 a.m. Consider stopping for tonight only and seeing what happens, not permanently, not as a decision about your life, only for the next few hours, as an experiment in the dark where nobody is watching. Consider one more thing about the leaf, and then we will let the image go. The leaf does not know where the river ends. It has no map. It cannot see past the next bend. From where it sits on the surface, the journey is entirely unknowable, and it makes no difference at all to whether it arrives. You do not need to see past the bend tonight either. That was never a requirement of being carried. Consider the willows at the bend, since we are already there. Willows grow at the edges of rivers because their roots can tolerate being underwater. They lean out over the current, and their branches hang down and trail in the water, and they move constantly, all day, in a way that looks like effort and is not. Nothing in that scene is working. The water is not working. The tree is not working. The leaves going past are not working. And the whole arrangement has been running for centuries without a single conscious decision from anyone. You are inside an arrangement like that. You have always been inside one. Your effort has been a very small part of a very large system that has been carrying you the entire time. Feel the river now in your imagination. Feel the cold of it and the weight of it, and the steady, unhurried pull that has been moving in the same directions since before anyone in your family was born. Feel yourself on the surface of it, not sinking, held up by nothing you are doing. Feel the bank going past, the willows, the stone bridge overhead, and then behind you, the fields opening out on both sides. Feel that you are moving without effort and have been for a long time, including on all the nights you believed you were the one doing the work. Feel your hands, which have been gripping something. Feel them open. Feel the water take the weight of your whole body without any change in its speed. You are held tonight by something that does not notice the weight. The current has not slowed. It will not slow before morning. Consider that the leaf never has to decide to trust the river. Trust is not part of the transaction. The leaf has no opinion about the water, and the water does not require one. That may be a relief if you have spent time worrying about whether your trust is sufficient, whether you believe correctly enough, whether the quality of your faith is up to the situation. The river does not check. It carries whatever falls in at whatever level of conviction, including none at all. Rest on the surface. Rest without steering. Rest the way something rests when it has finally stopped trying to hold position in a current. Let the water do what water does. There is peace in being carried by something that never once found you heavy. There is one last image before the night is done. Consider one last thing about that river, and then we will leave it. Every river in the world is going to the same place, not the same route, not the same speed. Some take a week and some take a season. But there is no river anywhere that is going nowhere. The leaf does not need to know that. It would not help the leaf to know it. The information is entirely useless to something floating on the surface with no ability to steer. But it is true regardless of whether the leaf knows it, and it stays true on the nights when the leaf is caught against a root and convinced the journey has stopped. There is a scene in the Gospels that takes place in an upstairs room at night at the end of a long meal, and it contains a sentence spoken directly to heavy hearts. The room was borrowed. Someone had lent it for the evening. Upstairs, above a street in a crowded city, with lamps on the table and the sounds of the city coming up through the window. The teacher was there with his closest friends. 12 of them, more or less, the men who had walked with him for 3 years. They had eaten together, bread, wine, the ordinary food of an ordinary evening meal. And then the tone of the room changed. He began to tell them that he would be leaving, not immediately, but soon. He spoke about it plainly, without softening it, and they did not understand most of what he was saying, but they understood enough to be frightened. Consider what that did to the room. These were men who had left their work to follow him, fishermen who had walked away from boats, a tax collector who had walked away from a desk. They had reorganized their entire lives around this person, and now, at a dinner table, he was telling them he was going somewhere they could not come. The text records their reactions, and they are the reactions of people whose hearts have just become very heavy. One asks a confused question. Another protests. Another says he will go anywhere, even to death, which he will not, and everyone in the room, including him, will find that out within a day. The room was full of grief that had not arrived yet, anticipatory grief, which is its own particular weight. Nothing had happened. Everything was about to. You may know that weight. It is the one that keeps people awake more reliably than actual disaster does. The test result that has not come back. The conversation scheduled for Thursday. The parent whose health is declining slowly enough that nothing is urgent and nothing is fine. Anticipatory grief does not let a person rest, because there is nothing yet to grieve and nothing yet to do, and the mind cannot find a place to put itself. And into that room, into exactly that kind of heaviness, he said this: "Let not your hearts be troubled." Consider the timing of that sentence, because the timing is the whole thing. It was not said on an easy evening. It was not said to people whose situation was about to improve. It was said in the last calm hours before the hardest days of their lives, by someone who knew precisely what was coming, to people whose hearts were correct to be heavy. He did not tell them they were overreacting. He did not tell them the grief was unwarranted. He did not explain why the situation was better than it looked. It was not better than it looked. This is not a story about a misunderstanding being cleared up. You do not have to pretend your situation is lighter than it is in order to receive what he offered. There is no requirement anywhere in that room to feel differently about the facts. He simply asked them not to let their hearts stay troubled, and then gave them something to put in place of it. He said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you." Notice that phrase, not as the world gives. The world's peace is conditional. It arrives when circumstances cooperate. It is the peace of a resolved situation, a paid debt, a good test result, a difficult conversation that went better than expected. It is real, and it is welcome, and it can be taken away by the next phone call. He was describing something else, a peace given ahead of the circumstances and not removed by them, a peace handed over in an upstairs room on the worst night of the year to people who were about to lose everything they had built their lives around. That is the only kind of peace worth having at 2 a.m, because it is the only kind available at 2 a.m. The world's peace requires daylight and information and other people's cooperation. This one does not. Consider how much of your life you have spent waiting for the first kind, waiting to feel settled until the money came through, until the diagnosis was clear, until the person you love was steady again, each time believing that the peace would arrive with the resolution. Sometimes it does, and then something else arrives, and the waiting starts again, and a person can spend 40 years like that without ever once having an evening that was simply calm. The second kind of peace does not work that way. It is given in advance. It is given in upstairs rooms on bad nights. It is given to people whose situations are not going to improve by morning. Consider what he was doing practically in that moment. He was not fixing their situation. The situation was going to unfold exactly as he had said. He was giving them something to carry through it. Notice also that he says it twice. "Let not your hearts be troubled," near the beginning of the evening, and then again later, after more explanation, after more of their confused questions. "Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." Twice, because once was not going to be enough for a room in that condition. He knew that. He said it again anyway. You may need it said twice as well. Most people do. A single reassurance at the start of a difficult night has never yet lasted until morning. Let not your heart be troubled. Consider that this sentence was aimed at the heart specifically, not the mind, not the circumstances. The heart, which is where the weight actually sits when it is late and there is nothing to be done. The heart is not a reasoning organ. You cannot argue it into calm. That is why the sentence is not an explanation. It is closer to a hand placed on a shoulder. It does not persuade. It steadies. Notice that this is how you would speak to someone you loved who was frightened at night. Not with an argument, with a steady voice saying something simple more than once until the body believed it. That is what was happening in that room. Someone speaking to frightened people the way you speak to a child in the dark, not condescending, just accurate about what actually helps. There is a grace in being spoken to that way, especially by someone who was not offering false comfort. He knew what the next 3 days held. He did not pretend otherwise at any point in that conversation. And he still said, "Let not your heart be troubled," because both things were true at once, and they are still both true tonight. Your circumstances may be exactly as difficult as you think they are, and your heart is still being offered peace inside them. You do not have to choose between those two sentences. It is not one or the other. This is not a bargain where honesty about the difficulty costs you the comfort. Consider the men in that room and what happened to them afterward. Within a day, most of them ran. One denied knowing him. They failed in exactly the ways frightened people fail, and the record does not hide any of it. And the sentence had still been given to them before the failure, knowing the failure was coming. That is the part to hold if you are lying awake, feeling that you have not handled something well. The peace in that room was not a reward for the way they were about to behave. It was given in advance to people who were about to do poorly by someone who knew exactly how poorly. Feel the upstairs room now in your imagination. Feel the low light of the lamps on the table. Feel the remains of a meal that nobody is eating anymore. Feel the quiet of a group of people who have run out of questions. Feel the sentence moving across that room, not loudly, spoken to people who could not fully receive it yet, and who would understand it properly only much later, looking back. Feel it arriving where you are. Let not your heart be troubled. You are held tonight by a peace that was given before the difficulty, on purpose by someone who knew the difficulty was coming. It does not depend on tomorrow. It was never contingent on tomorrow. Consider how he said it. The text gives no stage direction, but the shape of the sentence suggests something quiet, not a proclamation, something said across a table to people who were sitting close enough to hear it without effort. That is how the most durable sentences tend to arrive, not shouted, said once, quietly, in a small room, and then repeated by people who were there, and then written down, and then read aloud in dark rooms for 2,000 years. Rest inside it. Rest without waiting for the heaviness to leave first. Let the heaviness be present, and let the peace be present at the same time, the way they were in that room, on that night, at that table. Those two things have never been mutually exclusive. That is the whole discovery of the upstairs room. There is one last image before the night is done. Consider what happened to that upstairs room after everyone left it. The lamps burned down. Somebody, probably whoever owned the house, came up in the morning and cleared the table. Cups, crumbs, the ordinary residue of a meal. The room went back to being a room. It was not marked. Nobody built anything there. For most of the next 2,000 years, nobody could even say for certain where it had been. And the sentence spoken in it outlasted the building entirely. That is worth noticing at this hour. The rooms do not last. The sentences sometimes do. Something said quietly to frightened people at a table has traveled 2 millennia and arrived in a bedroom tonight where you are lying in the dark. There is one last image to carry into sleep tonight. It is not a story with characters. It is only a sound in a village at the end of a day. For most of human history, in most places, there was a bell. It hung in a tower at the center of the village, and it rang at fixed hours, morning, midday, and then at dusk, when the light started to go, it rang again. That last one had a purpose that people understood without needing it explained. It meant the day was over, not the tasks. The tasks were rarely finished. There were always more rows to weed, more wood to split, more repairs waiting on the barn. The bell did not care about any of that. It rang at the same time whether the work was done or not. Consider what that would have done to a village. Nobody had to decide when to stop. Nobody had to judge whether they had accomplished enough that day to be allowed to go inside. Nobody had to negotiate with themselves in the field about whether one more hour would be responsible. The bell decided, and the bell was not open to argument. Notice how much that arrangement gives back to a person. The hardest part of stopping is not the stopping. It is the permission. It is the internal debate about whether you have earned the right to sit down, which can go on much longer than the work itself would have. A bell removes the debate. It is external. It is impersonal. It rings for the diligent and the lazy at exactly the same moment, and it does not know which of them you have been today. That is a kind of mercy built into the architecture of a village. Nobody designed it as mercy. It was practical. Bells marked hours because clocks were rare and expensive. But the effect on tired people was mercy anyway. Notice how often that happens. Grace hidden inside something ordinary. A bell rung for practical reasons that quietly told a whole village every single evening that they were allowed to stop. Consider what it would sound like from a field. You are bent over, working, and the sound comes across the fields from a distance, slightly flattened by the air, and your body knows what it means before your mind does. Your back straightens, your hands stop, and you walk in. Not because you finished, because the bell rang, and the day is a thing that ends on its own schedule, and you were never the one deciding. Consider also that everyone heard it at once, the whole village stopping together. Nobody left in the field alone, working late, wondering if they should be doing more. The stopping was communal. It was normal. It was simply what happened at that hour to everyone every day. You may have been missing that. Most people now are. Consider your own evening. There was no moment in it that clearly marked the end. The work simply thinned out. At some point you stopped, but you never quite closed anything, which is why part of you is still out in the field at this hour, working in the dark, with nobody to tell you to come in. That is not a personal failing. It is the absence of a bell. There is no bell in a modern evening. Nothing external tells you the day is over. The work follows you home in a device in your pocket. The permission to stop has been handed to you personally, which sounds like freedom and functions, most nights, as a burden. You have been trying to ring your own bell. It does not work well. The person deciding whether you have done enough is the same person who has never once been satisfied. So let this be the bell tonight. Consider that a bell does not ask whether you are ready. It does not check your progress. It rings, and the ringing is the entire argument, and the peace that follows is not something you talked yourself into. Let this be that. The day is over, not because the tasks are complete. They are not. They were never going to be. The day is over because the day is over, and that has nothing to do with your output. There is a grace in a rule that does not consult you. It cannot be argued with, which means it also cannot be undermined by the part of you that always finds one more reason to keep going. Consider that the bell rang whether or not anyone was listening. It rang for people in the fields and people already home. It rang for the sick who could not have worked anyway. It rang for children who had no work to stop. It rang into empty houses. Nothing about the ringing depended on being received. It simply marked the hour for everyone, whether or not any particular person heard it. That is a good shape for a mercy. Impersonal, reliable, not contingent on your attention. Feel the field now in your imagination. Feel the last of the light going. Feel the tiredness in your hands and the dirt on them. And feel the sound arriving across the fields, low, unhurried, repeating a few times and then stopping. Feel your back straighten. Feel the tool leaving your hands. Feel yourself turning toward the lights of the houses. You are held tonight by something that ends the day on your behalf. You did not have to decide. You do not have to justify stopping. The bell rang. That is the whole reason, and it has always been enough. Consider what happens in a village the moment after the bell stops. Nothing dramatic. People walk in from the fields. Doors open and close. Somebody calls a child in. The ordinary noise of a place transitioning from work to evening. And then gradually quiet. Lamps going out one house at a time. The day closing not because anyone finished, but because the hour arrived. That transition happened every single evening for centuries, in thousands of villages, for millions of people who never once had to decide whether they had done enough. Rest now. Rest without permission from yourself, which you were never going to grant anyway. The day is closed. There is peace in a bell you did not have to ring yourself. There is grace in an hour that arrives on its own and does not ask what you accomplished. Consider all the bells that rang tonight in the hours you have been lying here. Somewhere a shift ended and a nurse handed over her patients to somebody else and went home. Somewhere a shop was locked. Somewhere a parent finished the last task of a very long day and sat down for the first time since 6 a.m. None of them finished everything. All of them stopped anyway. The stopping was never conditional on completion. It has never once been conditional on completion for anyone in the entire history of tired people. You do not need to remember anything you heard tonight. If one image stayed with you, let that be enough. Perhaps the sack on the cart, perhaps the box under the bed, perhaps the bell across the fields at the end of a long day. Any one of them is enough. The bell has rung, the box is closed, the sack is on the boards beside you, and the cart is still moving, and the horse has not once noticed the difference. Somewhere a river is carrying leaves. It will never count. Somewhere a lamp has gone out beside a half-built wall that is still standing. Somewhere 4 men are climbing down from a roof they broke open, going home, not waiting to be thanked. None of them are holding anything tonight. Neither are you, unless you want to be. And if nothing stayed, that is fine too. You were not being taught. You were being kept company while something heavy was set down. Consider that you have been lying still for 3 hours now, which is longer than you have been still in some time. Whatever else the night did or did not accomplish, your body has had 3 hours of not doing anything, and that is not nothing. If you are still with us, thank you for staying. If you have already drifted off somewhere along the way, thank you for that too. Both were welcome here. You do not have to have received any of this correctly. There was no correct way to receive it. The stories were only ever a warm sound in a dark room, arranged to be easy to fall asleep inside. And if that is all they were tonight, then they did exactly what they were built to do. Wherever you are right now, in whatever room, at whatever hour, you are welcome exactly as you are. Whatever you were carrying is still there in the morning if you want it back. You are held, and you have been held all along, including on every night you were certain you were holding everything yourself. The night is not asking anything else of you. It has not asked anything of you for some time now. Sleep well tonight deeply, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Chapel.